There are certainly a number of benefits to isolation, those being, of course, introspection, being able to look back on and reflect on who you are, where you came from, and various ideas that may be able to help you cope with the situation that you're in, or simply give yourself a new perspective, a renewed perspective that allows you to, look at the world in a new light or something. I don't know. There's a lot of things we can do in isolation. Meditation is one of them that I find that helps me a lot, that clears my own mind, is meditating. And I've gotten really into it. I want to go back to doing it for an hour, a few hours each day, the way that I used to. And I've created a meditation plan surrounding that idea. And so hopefully that goes well. But in general, and perhaps this is a pretentious way of phrasing it, but I've been discovering the inner workings of my own consciousness in various ways as of late. And I think as I start to learn more how to meditate, and as I continue on with the meditation where I left off, I try new methods and so on. I think there's a real breakthrough that I've been coming to, and I don't quite want to reveal what it is yet, but I've been discovering a number of things. But regardless of all of that, isolation has a number of benefits. And another thing that I tend to like to do is studying things. I try to find like one subject that I'm really into, one thing that I think is really cool, and then I try to find as much information about that one thing as I possibly can, so I can have the most informed views on it that I can. If someone brings something up, I can just, give them a barrage of words and explanations on that specific thing. I like being the guy who knows about the stuff that they're talking about. As much as I enjoy the kind of, like silly, incoherent nature of my speech where I'm just sort of making strange remarks about stuff, I am self-aware that I do that. I think it's funny to do that. I also like being able to speak on certain things with a degree of authority. Not to imply that I am an authority, I'm definitely not. But I like to be able to have a little bit more knowledge on certain things that I'm really into, that other people might not have that knowledge on. So when the topic comes up, I can go, oh, hey, yeah, it's not like that, it's really like this. Or, yeah, these are the inner workings of this thing. And especially because, the fun of learning comes in how much you enjoy the specific thing that you're learning about. If you're really fascinated by, Russia from 1926 to 1956 or something, then when you start really amassing as much information about that as you can, and you really take all of it in, it's exciting. It's exciting to, look at all these different authors that might be talking about that specific era, and then categorizing, okay, I'm going to read this book, or I'm going to flip through this book and try and find this specific thing, and he cites this, so I'm going to go to this source, and you start like weaving a tapestry out of all of these strings of information that surround this one subject. And I love doing that. I love just sitting down and consuming information about stuff. I got really, really obsessed with this when I was learning Japanese consistently, is that for a couple of months, most of what I did was go on Anki and, study the kanji and stuff, and then just obsessively work on the other aspects of my Japanese. Now, of course, that did slow after, the first month, but I continued tackling at it. And that was for, like, especially like the first week. There was an entire week where I just woke up, studied Japanese, and then went to sleep, where that was like the only thing I did for that entire week. I just had Japanese on all the time, and then I was just studying it obsessively. I think that's really fun. I think it's really, really fun to be able to try and test the limits of your own ability to consume information, to test the limits of your own consciousness. And I think that ties into sort of what I was beginning to imply earlier. What was it? There was something else I wanted to mention. Oh yeah, so I enjoy this. I enjoy this process of how many things you can learn when you're by yourself. There's all this talk lately. I've been hearing this talk lately about the concept of over socialization. The idea that the things that people believe become sort of muddied by the fact that they want to please others, and that they don't really have a set of core principles or things that they personally believe in, because they're so influenced by those around them. They're just sort of looking for the dopamine of approval, that approval becomes their primary motivator. And there's also this talk of under-socialization, that because people are under-socialized, they don't necessarily have the mechanisms to function in real life that would allow them to, make connections with a group of other people, or be able to forge a sort of community in the real world, get a job, these kind of things. And I have trouble understanding why these things are important in the first place. Obviously, I have friends of my own, and I would say that I relatively at least enjoy the company that I spend with them. But I don't, like, if all of that stuff was just taken away immediately, if all of that was gone, I feel like I would probably be fine. I've had many, many periods, long periods in my life, when I was completely fine just being totally by myself. And at many points, including right now, I intentionally make that occur. I intentionally isolate myself from other people for, at least a little bit of time every now and again, just because I need it. It's like a juice that I get back from spending, a few days, a week, or a month completely by myself, even isolated from those people online. And if everything, if all the cards fell and everybody was gone, I think I would be totally okay. Because that's just how my brain operates. Where, like, the next thing that I go to isn't necessarily, who can I share this information with next? It's what information can I find next? What thing can I be entertained by that's going to be stimulating, that's going to provide something substantial to me. And I like that. And of course, I like the comfy, euphoric times as well of just being idle and wasting my time away. But there's room for that. There's a time and place for everything. And so, this idea of under-socialization, I don't really understand why it's important as a concept, at least from my own individual perspective. Obviously, I can understand why, if you need a job, which I'm going to end up needing one, or if you are in a position in which you want a community of people, being under-socialized can be a detriment to you. But for me, it hasn't really been one. Like, there have been situations that I've been in where being under-socialized was obviously harmful to me in that situation. But it wasn't harmful overall. It was just like, oh, I didn't do too well here, or it was like, oh, this is going to be moderately annoying today, or perhaps very annoying today. Even I see every very annoying experience as a learning experience, because if I have a situation where I'm angry, or if I have which I mean, I don't get angry. The last time I got angry was like, I think it was when the US bombed, when I thought we were about to go to war with Iran and then we didn't. I got so mad because like the whole idea was just retarded. It was predicated on a lie for one, and I mean most of these wars are predicated on lies. Um, but like, and I'm not a moralist. I don't really believe in any concept of objective morality. I don't really believe in morality as a whole. Um, but there are a couple issues that I sometimes I grind my gears about, and war is one of them. I don't like war. I've never liked war. And so, I got pretty mad. I got pretty mad when that was going down. I was like, oh hey, is it time? Or are we gonna do this? And it turned out that we didn't. As with most things in the world, nothing really happens. They just sort of seem like it's kind of going to happen. Um, and it was all a big show. But I got pretty mad there for a while because I thought something was going to happen. Um, and that was like the first time I got genuinely angry in a very long time. The only other time I could remember was when my dog got ran over in November-ish of 2018. That was the last time I got mad. Um, I think I blew up. No, I blew up at a specific friend of mine, like a few times, but that wasn't really. That was more of like it wasn't like an anger. It wasn't an anger that came out as a result of just me being my natural self, like the having the elements of myself that are present most of the time. Those things were more so induced by external phenomena that I didn't have so much control over. But regardless of those weird abstractions or perhaps excuses, the last time I got really, really mad, noticeably angry, a type of anger that didn't, deplete is after 10 or so minutes, 5 or so minutes, that wasn't gone in an instant, was was that situation where my dog got ran over. And at that point, I was ready. I was completely ready to kill the person who ran over the dog. I wanted to, desperately. And I don't get that very often. Um, and then the only other time I could think of where I got that angry, where it lasted more than, 5, 10 at the most minutes, was that Iran, where we almost went to war. And it's weird, I don't have very many things like that. There's very, very few things, very, very few, where I have the possibility of getting mad on principle. It doesn't really happen. Um, because for one, I don't really have very many principles, and I think the concept of having principles is a bit of a weakness in a lot of ways because it limits you. It limits your potential for the things that you can achieve. And it's really just not pragmatic. Um, and a lot of the time they're based around things that we make ourselves believe rather than things that can necessarily be proven. Um, so I try to keep broad principles, things like, okay, war is bad. Well, there's not there's not a lot of counter arguments to that, or if they are, they're couched in a lot of bullshit like our national security and these other buzzwords that um, can pretty easily be undermined by the fact that the U.S. has the biggest military in the world and the best geography in the world and these kind of things. We're not in any danger. Um, and so it's like a snap of a finger. It's done. The people who are arguing for war have no arguments. So that's one of those things where like it's so fundamentally difficult to buy into the other person's side because they're just wrong. But there aren't very many things like that in the world. Like, most things are so complicated that it's difficult to have a stance on them. It's difficult to believe something so strongly that you would have a principle about it because they're so complicated. And so when we start, putting these things under a magnifying glass and all these statements start getting antiquated, and you really think about it, we begin to see that there's contradictions in all kinds of things. There's always more questions. Every time that there's an answer to one question, that answer inevitably leads to other questions. And so I find myself being unable to make qualitative statements about so many things, much less principles about so many things, because there's so many different answers that could, in theory, be true. Which one do I choose? It's difficult. But there are a few things where they aren't that hard. Where if I say war is bad, it's a pretty simple statement. War is bad. And so it's easier for me to get passionate about something like that. And even when that happened, like, as I said, I got over it, after a couple days, a week or whatever. But that was that was the longest I had been angry in my entire life, was that 1 week. I was mad for a week, or I think it was actually less than a week. I don't remember exactly. But about that Iran ordeal. And that felt like an insane concept to me, that I would be that consistently angry. It was unheard of. Because, like, I think of people who have done, genuinely terrible, horrible things to me, and I was unable to get angry at them at all. When I was in the mental hospital, for instance, I had multiple situations in which my life was threatened, in which my human rights were violated, in which, I was pretty severely taken down. And you guys have all heard those stories of me making a shiv out of a bone when I was in the mental hospital and all that. It was a fucked up time, that first time I went there. The second time was a lot more chill, but, it was insane, the level of violation that I had experienced when I was there. And not a single time did I get angry. I felt a bit of pleasure when I saw that fag, who, one of them, or, I mean, there were multiple fags in this scenario who did quite terrible things. But when I saw the really autistic one breaking down crying, I did feel a lot of pleasure when I saw that. But it's not the same, Enjoyment of other people suffering, I feel like I get that more often than I would getting angry at people. I just can't. Because in my own head, I look at it and I go, the reason these people are experiencing these things against me, the reason they're doing them to me, is for a very complex set of reasons that we don't fully understand. And so who am I to get angry at these people when we don't even have a firm grasp of why they're doing them, much less the inner psychology of their mind. And in many ways, at least, we can observe that they are damaged. And so if they're taking these actions and we know they're damaged in some way, what good is it for me to be angry at them? For one, it doesn't do anything. Like, being mad in and of itself achieves nothing. There are actions that you can take as a result of being mad, and those actions can be good things, but you can do those actions without necessarily having the emotion be the prerequisite to them. And so it's a matter of perspective, right? Like, if you know that something is right, then just do the thing that's right. You don't need to be angry in order to fuel doing what's right, And so, like, what does being angry achieve other than just making you feel bad? There are studies that have been done, very, in depth, studies that show that anger is severely bad for your health, that it can, it can lead to depression and other things, and it can really fuck with your head. It's bad for you. It achieves nothing. In and of itself, it achieves nothing. It just makes you feel worse. And so, if a feeling is making you feel worse, why not just completely let go of it? Why not just let go of the things that are bringing you pain? And I think this is one of the ultimate lessons of meditation, or using things like psychedelics, is that when you start to really take things into perspective and disconnect yourself from your own ego, the external projections that we put onto the world around us and other people, and we look at all of it in context. We take ourselves out of the scenario for a moment, and we really look objective. Well, nothing can truly be objective, but we look at it from an outside perspective, rather than just filtering everything through our own daily emotions, or through the same quote unquote principles we've always filtered things through, and look at them for what it is that they achieve. Or look at, am I making sense here? I feel like I'm kind of going all over the place. What I'm attempting to say is that there's more than meets the eye. And so part of humility and being able to admit your own faults, or being able to what is the word, recognize that we aren't infallible, is also being able to take a step back and disconnect from all this external stimuli that's around us, but disconnect from all of these, tangential emotions we may be feeling in the moment, and consider for a moment why it is that we're feeling them, how they can be tackled, what it is that they're causing. That there's so much context that surrounds these things that, the idea of not taking a step back and thinking about it is bewildering to me. It's insane. These are your feelings. This is your mind, and your mind affects your body, and your body affects your mind. These things are intertwined with one another. If you're going to take care of your body, you have to take care of your mind, and if you're going to take care of your mind, you have to take a damn step back and look at the things that you're putting into it. You have to take a step back and look at the things that your mind is producing. Those emotions have a very real effect, and many of them are completely useless. Anger is a completely useless emotion. There's no purpose to it other than to feel self-righteous. And perhaps it's self-serving to you to feel self-righteous that you're mad. And perhaps, you get a little bit of a masturbatory feeling from that. But that's all it is masturbation. And it's not even the good kind, because what the masturbation ultimately comes from is a self, what is the word I'm looking for here? Justification. You're justifying it to yourself that, I feel this madness, and so there must be a reason. Well, it's a good thing. Yeah, anger's a good thing. That's why it's good. Yeah. You're just justifying the feeling to yourself, and that's where the pleasure comes from. But ultimately, that pleasure is a drop in the bucket in comparison to the peace that you could be feeling. And this is the ultimate message that I'm trying to get here, is that feeling peace, not euphoria, or extreme good feels, or extreme bad feels, or extreme self-righteous feels, or any specific emotion that you could pinpoint on a chart on the spectrum of emotions that human beings can feel. Peace, a clear mind, a logical attitude, peaceful feelings are far, far better than any of those that you could pinpoint. Because the same peace that I get from considering all of these different things, the inner workings of the mind and myself, exploring myself and trying to correct the mistakes that I've made in the past through self-reflection, all of these things, they require, you to look at your own biases and these kind of things. But it is in the pursuit of peace. It's in the pursuit of getting to a higher state of consciousness where your emotions, on some level, like we're never the same person when we wake up each day. We're always a different person when we wake up, always. And no two people are the same in the same sense that, you are never the same as you wake up. Your emotional state is always changing. Your consciousness is always changing. You're always different. But just because of this, just because of the fact that in a certain sense, the emotional state that we're in is always going to influence the actions that we take and the way that we think. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can't tool that emotional state to be peaceful and to influence our decision-making in a peaceful way. And what I mean by that is looking at things more logically. And so, for example, you think taking an action is good when you're angry. Well, why is taking that action good? What outcomes ultimately come of having done this thing, and how are you going to do it? What facilitates that action? And then you have to consider as well, why am I angry? What does anger do in this equation? Does it lead to the action getting done? Perhaps, but could I have led to that action getting done in another way? Yes. And when you start really looking at things that way, the action, if the action is so important to you, the action is all it is that matters. Ultimately, that's the only thing we can quantify, is action. We, human beings are men of action. We're made to do things. Like one of the first things that you ever do when you're a kid, and people like to be recognized for this, is that you show your family a picture. You draw, with a crayon or whatever it is that you have, you take it out and you show your family a picture. It was something you made. You put in your own emotional labor, physical labor, to have made something to present to other people. And you feel good when people see it. It was a product of your own heart. And even at those young ages, we have the ability to do things, to make things. That's part of the human spirit. Doing things, acting is part of the human spirit. And it worries me that so much of our own actions, the way that we do things, is predicated on this idea that we have to be emotional in order to act. And I think what people should be doing instead is not acting at first at least, and just thinking. Don't act, just think. And after you do that, after you consider all of the implications surrounding these things, and you've found a course of action that is correct, and perhaps you agree with the same course of action that you had when you were angry, take that course of action. Do it. Because obviously you've been able to logically discern that it is correct, then if it's correct, then do it. What's the point of staying angry about it when anger produces nothing in and of itself? It's just there. It's a lingering bad feeling. It's a feeling that upsets you. It disrupts your mood. It can disrupt your sleep. And I know I'm singling out this emotion as one example, but there's a multitude of other emotions that you could give as well. That one's just particularly useless. And so when you start, what was the point I was going to make? There's a lot of different things to consider, and I think ultimately on the path to inner peace, on the path to viewing the world in a more logical way, what one should ultimately be doing is looking at their emotional self, the person who, the emotional self that's dictating so many of their decisions, taking a step back and not necessarily suppressing it. No, don't suppress it. Don't suppress your emotions. That's bad. but instead learn to master your own mind to the extent that they don't appear, that they don't show themselves. Because I've had this forward-thinking mentality and I've introspected about how it is that I feel and what it is that I do at such a young age, and I've done all of this research on the internet, I've been able to come away from so many horribly traumatic experiences unscathed. I've been able to come away from so many experiences in which other people would erupt emotionally unscathed. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I've had my outbursts. People who talk to me know that I've had my outbursts. But the point is to try. It always is the point. It's to try. If you have the ability, why don't you do it, you know? And I think I'm always improving at this as time goes on. You know, history is constantly in motion. It's never a static entity that's unchanging. You are always changing. Even if you don't want to, you are. Because the longer your body is here, hey, it's gonna, you know, it's gonna have reactions as well. And those reactions are gonna affect the way that you think. So like you're always changing in one way or another. But let's see, what was I getting to here? There was a broader point I wanted to connect back to. It's just my memory is so bad that, you know, I used to be able to do these vlogs where I was just going boom, boom, idea, 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 and then connecting them all to one another. But because my memory has become so much worse, it's difficult for me to be able to keep track of all these different strings of thought. So I apologize for that, but yeah, it's basically what I'm saying here is that you'll feel a lot better if you just, in isolation, learn to master yourself. Learn to be able to not suppress your emotions, but simply not feel them. Emotional suppression and having control, or simply not feeling them at all as a result of, you know, coming to more logical conclusions, are totally different things. And if your emotions are so extreme that you feel that you have to suppress them, I think that's a sign of a much bigger problem that needs to be addressed. And the only way to do that is years at times of trying to do it. And I think isolation is one of the most enlightening ways to do that. Is because when you have all of this time to yourself, you do have leisure time. You do have time to goof off and be silly the way that I do. But you also have time to come to immensely important reflections and can come into combat with the elements of our consciousness that at many times we're afraid of combating. Like, I remember the periods of my life where I was the most emotional. For example, after a pretty big breakup I had with my first relationship, I never wanted to be alone with my own thoughts because I was so fundamentally terrified of what was inside of my own mind that merely being alone left me with the concern that potentially a thought could arise in my head that would upset me. That was to the level that I was ignoring it because I didn't want to face anything that was there. When what I should have done and what I did eventually do is face them head on, which can often be sometimes, you know, the most painful in the moment. But afterwards, the pain is completely gone because you've already faced it and it's not there anymore. And once you've faced it, you don't have anything to worry about. And, you know, when I was doing morning glory seeds recently, I had this thought that, like, for example, you know, with my own gender identity or, you know, my own sexuality, the fact that I've suppressed my attraction to to other men for so long, and that I saw it as this like horrible part of myself that just needed to go away, this disgusting, dangerous thing that, other people should be ashamed of, and that it should be hidden. This self-hatred for what's essentially just a natural reaction to sexual stimuli was there. But it wasn't there for a reason. Like my preferences in terms of, the way that I like to present myself, in more feminine ways at times. And I'll talk about that more in another video, where I believe that people have oftentimes multiple selves. So you have a masculine self or a feminine self, a gender neutral self. I believe I have many different selves. Now, I don't believe in continuity of self, the idea that, people are always the same. And I don't believe in the concept of identity, more generally speaking, but I do think that there is a semblance of an identity inside of us, but the way that it exists and the way that it asserts itself is so complex that it often leads to multiple ones that exists in our own minds. And so I find myself wanting to project, masculine elements at times, and then at other times wanting to project feminine elements, but both parts of my consciousness are a part of me, and I'll get to that later. But what I realized, doing LSA and coming to terms with the fact that I, as a person, have no justifiable reason in the world to hate myself that much over things that I simply cannot change, and that effectively hurt no one. It really put things into perspective. That why is it that I hide anything? Obviously, there are strategic reasons one might hide certain things, but why be so bent out of shape and angry at yourself over being an LGBTQ weirdo? Why does it matter? Who cares? Be as weird as you want. It's a part of our consciousness that we don't fully understand yet. But that's what makes it so beautiful. It isn't, and I understand this frustration with the idea that human complexity is this, annoying thing that, can't be beautiful in and of itself. I understand the frustration. But I think what the people who are the most annoyed by, what is often a fetishization of human complexity by people like myself, I think where they miss the mark in their hatred of people with similar feelings to me is in the fact that discovering the inner workings of the psyche and asking all of these questions and finding answers that lead to more questions, the act of doing this is so enticing and fun to explore. And I love that. I love doing that because it feels like the world is this untapped beast where there's always new things to find. And you can continually, find you can continually find exciting. It's an unexplored frontier. Well, it is explored by everyone. We all exist, but it's to boldly go where no man has gone before, and I like that a lot. But to get to what I was saying previously, there are certain feelings we have that we have to come to terms with, that we have to fight head on, that we have to see, even if it hurts a lot in the moment. Some of my most profound moments were near-death experiences, moments in which I almost died. And other people would consider those moments to be the most traumatic, the things that they would never want to talk about, And I look at them, And I see them as profoundly educational. All of the worst things that we can feel are profoundly educational, and they can give us an entirely renewed perspective when we do feel better, when we do come to terms with them, when we do face them, and we have to face them, because that's the only way we can feel that way. If we don't, they continue lingering in the background, subtly showing their effects as life goes on, making us feel worse. Maybe not as overtly as when we do finally face them, but that feeling is short-lasting. Once we find the root cause and we tackle it, it's done. It's done. You don't have to worry anymore. That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. The worst things that we can feel are just abstractions within our consciousness. But once we finally experience them, and we've been made to face them, we learn that they're not that scary after all. So afterwards we feel fine. And it's here, through this self-exploration, that I think we can learn that you always need the downs to have the ups. You can't have the dark without the light, and you can't have the light without the dark. And realizing this, it had a profound impact on me, because I've always known it to some extent. But it's only when you're in that experience, where you have something that you've been suppressing actively, that you're forcing in the background, and you're made to come to terms with it, where you have to, where you can't hide from it anymore, that you realize just how impermanent all of these things are. All of the things that we find to be the most distressing, that we find to be the most upsetting, the most dangerous, they're impermanent. They don't last forever. With the snap of a finger, they can be gone. This is beautiful. This is a beautiful aspect of human life. And you know me, I'm a bit of a pessimist. But I can't help but feel like, with all of my philosophically pessimistic points of view, in those moments, that they fade away. That I've simply stepped into one car from another. And, who knows which conclusion is correct? I don't. You don't. Perhaps someone will one day. But I do know what feels as if it helps, and that is peace. Is that being peaceful with a sober mind, with a mind that views things not in the moment but in context, not in the short term but in the long term, who views things not narrowly but as a whole, that with that mindset, we can achieve the things that we wanted to achieve otherwise, that those other feelings that would be coming about aren't needed and often are disturbing. And we generally feel better. And who doesn't want to feel better?